tariffs 10 to 15% on American agricultural machines, as well as oil, coal, LNG. A couple of American companies added to this unreliable entity list, and also export control on tungsten-related materials, materials used for solar panels, semiconductors. Very precise, very targeted measures, although not extensive, but it shows that China is not going to back down.
Imagine waking up to find the price of everything from your morning coffee to the car you've been saving up for has suddenly spiked. That's the reality millions of Americans and Chinese citizens are facing right now, as the world's two largest economies exchange tariff blows in a high-stakes trade showdown. On February 4th, 2025, the United States slapped a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports, triggering an immediate retaliation from Beijing. 15% tariffs on American liquefied natural gas and coal, plus 10% duties on crude oil, farm equipment, and pickup trucks. This isn't just political posturing. These measures are about to hit wallets, jobs, and dinner tables across both nations in ways that will reshape the global economy. Let's start with the American perspective. Those 10% tariffs on $401 billion worth of Chinese goods might sound like a win for domestic manufacturers, but the reality is more complicated. The average U.S. household could see annual costs jump by $1,700 to $2,350 as everything from electronics to clothing gets more expensive. Middle-class families will feel this pinch hardest. Imagine paying $300 more for your next smartphone, or $500 extra for a new washing machine. Retailers like Walmart and Target face an impossible choice: absorb the costs and slash profit margins, or pass them to consumers already grappling with inflation. The automotive sector is particularly vulnerable. While the 10% tariff on Chinese EV components might protect Detroit's automakers in the short term, it could delay America's electric vehicle transition and keep gas guzzlers dominant longer. Now flip the lens to China. Beijing's targeted 15% tariffs on U.S. energy exports are a surgical strike at America's economic strengths. By hitting liquefied natural gas, LNG, where the U.S. is the global export leader, China aims to cripple a sector that's been crucial to America's energy dominance. But this cuts both ways. Chinese manufacturers relying on U.S. coal for steel production now face higher input costs that could make their exports less competitive globally. The 10% tariff on American crude oil is particularly clever. While China only gets 7% of its oil from the U.S., this move forces Beijing to buy more from Russia and Saudi Arabia, strengthening those geopolitical ties at Washington's expense. The human impact becomes stark when we examine specific industries. Take American farmers, already reeling from China's 2018 to 2020 trade war tactics. While agricultural machinery isn't directly tariffed this time, the 10% duty on U.S. crude oil increases fuel costs for tractors and harvesters. A soybean farmer in Iowa might see operating costs rise 5 to 7%, potentially wiping out narrow profit margins. In China, manufacturers in Guangdong's industrial heartland face a double whammy: more expensive U.S. energy imports combined with weaker demand for their goods in America. This could trigger layoffs in export-focused factories that employ millions of migrant workers. Energy markets are becoming a battleground. The U.S. LNG industry, which exported $12.6 billion worth of gas to China in 2024, now faces a 15% price disadvantage compared to Qatari and Australian competitors. Companies like Cheniere Energy might need to reroute tankers to Europe, but that glut could depress global LNG prices by 8 to 12%, hurting profitability. Meanwhile, China's strategic petroleum reserves get a temporary boost as they stockpile cheaper Russian oil before the tariffs hit. American consumers won't escape unscathed. Analysts predict gasoline prices could rise 15 to 20 cents per gallon as refineries pay more for alternative crude sources. the tech Cold War enters a new phase through these tariffs. While not directly targeting semiconductors, the increased costs of Chinese electronics components could slow innovation in Silicon Valley. A 10% price hike on server parts from Shenzhen might delay cloud computing expansions by Amazon and Microsoft. Conversely, China's new export controls on rare earth metals, critical for everything from iPhones to fighter jets, could create shortages that push U.S. tech manufacturing costs up by 6 to 8%. This accelerates both nations' pushes for self-reliance, with the U.S. investing $5 billion in domestic rare earth processing and China pouring resources into homegrown chip fabrication. Financial markets are reacting violently. The S&P 500 dropped 0.72% immediately post-announcement, wiping out $280 billion in market value. Companies with heavy China exposure got hammered. Apple fell 3%, Nike 4.2%. Conversely, defense stocks and domestic energy producers saw bumps as investors bet on reshoring. The yuan slid 0.8% against the dollar, making Chinese exports slightly more competitive, but increasing the cost of dollar-denominated debt for Chinese corporations. Treasury yields dipped as traders fled to safety, while Bitcoin surged 5% as a perceived inflation hedge. For the American worker, the picture is mixed. The Economic Policy Institute estimates the tariffs could create 150,000 manufacturing jobs in sectors like steel and machinery. But these gains come at a cost. Each new job could cost consumers $815,000 annually through higher prices. Service sector workers face collateral damage. A restaurant owner in Ohio reports 12% fewer customers as disposable incomes shrink, while truck drivers see freight volumes dip as trade slows. In China, Foxconn is already discussing layoffs at its iPhone assembly plants, anticipating reduced U.S. demand. Global supply chains are unraveling in real time. Vietnamese factories report a 30% surge in orders as U.S. companies shift production from China. Mexico's manufacturing hubs near the border are booming, with industrial space leasing at record rates. But this diversification isn't smooth. A sneaker manufacturer moving production from Guangdong to Guadalajara faces 18-month delays and 22% higher labor costs. European companies get caught in the crossfire. German automakers face 10% higher costs for U.S.-sourced components, forcing tough choices between raising prices or shrinking margins. The political calculus is fascinating. President Trump's 10% across-the-board tariff plays well in Rust Belt swing states ahead of the 2026 midterms, but risks alienating suburban voters hit by consumer price hikes. China's measured response suggests President Xi is keeping powder dry. The 15% LNG tariff hurts America without devastating Chinese industry, preserving room for negotiation. Behind closed doors, both sides are gaming out escalation scenarios. A 60% U.S. tariff on Chinese goods, as Trump floated, could cost households $3,900 annually, while full Chinese export bans on rare earths might paralyze Western tech sectors. Long-term consequences could reshape globalization. The World Bank estimates global GDP growth could slow by 0.7% annually if tariffs persist, with developing nations hardest hit. Inflationary pressures might force the Federal Reserve to keep rates higher longer, crushing hopes for 2025 mortgage rate relief. In China, economists warn the tariffs could knock 1.5% off GDP growth, exacerbating existing crises in the property market and local government debt. For consumers in both nations, it's a lose-lose scenario. Americans pay more for goods, Chinese workers lose export jobs, and the global economy teeters on the edge of recession. As night falls on February 4th, 2025, families in Shanghai and Sacramento alike are crunching numbers, wondering how much their grocery bills will rise, whether their jobs are safe, and if their leaders will blink before this economic war claims more casualties. The coming weeks will test whether decades of global economic integration can withstand this new era of nationalist trade policies. One thing's certain, in the battle between American protectionism and Chinese state capitalism, it's ordinary citizens on both sides who pay the heaviest price.